In South Korea, one of the many rules you grew up with is this: obey your elders.
Do not move from your current position and please wait.
On April 16th, 2014, that obedience became a death sentence.
Help me, the ship seems to be sinking.
Inside the sinking hull, 250 high school students did exactly what they were told. They put on life jackets, held their phones, and waited for help that was never coming.
The ferry is tilted. I feel like throwing up. I don't understand what's going on.
Outside, the adults in charge were choosing a very different fate. This is Lee Jun-suk, captain of the MV Sewol ferry. While hundreds of teenagers trapped below fought for air, he ditched his uniform and crawled to safety.
Legally speaking, the captain has to be the last person to leave the ship.
This isn't the story of a ship that sank. It's the story of a massacre caused by cowardice, corruption, and a deadly demand for silence.
Families are in the state of shock and deep mourning.
But the Sewol didn't plunge into the ocean in seconds. It took nearly 2.5 hours to sink, more than enough time to evacuate everyone on board. So why were the students told to stay put? Why were nearby US Navy assets left waiting while students were still trapped below deck? And why was the rescue response a slow-motion disaster of hesitation, confusion, and optics? We break down the mechanics of this failure with veteran navigation officer Vincent Eychenne. He helped explain exactly how things spiraled out of control.
At some point, you need to remember that your priority is to save the lives on board, not to please the authority on board.
This is the story of 304 people who never made it home, the survivors who barely made it out alive, and an order that turned trust into a trap. And it all starts with a simple field trip. For Jeju Island and her classmates, this trip is a rite of passage. A long ferry ride to the scenic Jeju Island. A few days away from school, one last burst of teenage freedom before exams. The mood on board is exactly what you'd expect. Loud, messy, hyperactive, and full of excitement.
Because it was a once-in-a-lifetime field trip, we all wanted to go.
But beneath all the laughter, the ship is an accident waiting to happen. It was top-heavy due to recent modifications, like added cabins in the upper decks. Plus, thousands of tons of heavy cargo wasn't properly secured. All a recipe for disaster.
The ship was less stable, far less stable. So either they were well aware or it was pure negligence, but they did not look at the cargo limit at all before departure.
At 8:48 a.m., Captain Lee Jun-suk is nowhere near the bridge. He's in his cabin. Instead, an inexperienced third mate is at the helm, steering the massive vessel through the notoriously dangerous Mangle Channel. Meanwhile, in the cafeteria, Jeju Island and her fellow students noticed something strange.
We said amongst ourselves that our soup was tilted. Nobody thought it was a big deal.
Here at How to Survive, we try to look at the intricate survival details that other documentaries don't. If that sounds like something you're interested in, be sure to subscribe, make sure to give this video a like, and drop us a comment down below. Your support really goes a long way to help us create great content. The Sewol makes a sudden, unexpected course change. And then, a deafening bang echoes through the hull. The ship tilts sharply at a 30-degree angle while unsecured cargo slams to the port side. Heavy lockers smash across the room. In seconds, floors become steep hills.
But we heard someone screaming from the far end, and suddenly all the cabinets collapsed.
Back on the bridge, it's chaos.
The officer in charge, she did a change of course of 5 degrees to starboard. The quartermaster replied that the wheel doesn't function anymore. And that is when they realized that the ship is listing and they lost control of the situation.
The engines are shut off, leaving the ship to drift helplessly. When a ship begins to list, which in naval speak means tilt, there's always an evacuation window. But that window closes fast. Every degree makes movement harder. Doors jam, hallways turn vertical, water takes routes people cannot predict. Even standing becomes a survival task. By the time a ship is severely tilted, the obvious exit may still be visible, but physically reaching it is like climbing through a moving locker room while it floods. The students expect the next announcement to tell them how to escape. Instead, the speakers tell them the opposite.
Do not move from where you are now. Don't move because it's more dangerous.
The announcement itself, ice cold, totally calm. That's what makes it so goddamn terrifying.
I'll just say it like that. There is absolutely no justification for this order whatsoever. Inside, do you really think that 300 people outside on the outer decks is going to do a difference? Like, it doesn't hold up.
In hindsight, that sounds obvious. But in the moment, it sounds like procedure. In an emergency, you follow instructions. And for Zhang and her classmates, that instinct was automatic.
Because we have always been told that we'd be safe if we follow instructions.
And I told her to follow the teacher's guidance, which is my biggest regret. I should have told her to escape quickly.
The students aren't passive because they don't understand the danger. They're doing what they've been taught is safe. Some of the kids start joking to cope with the fear. Recovered phone videos show them laughing nervously.
This is like Titanic.
This is crazy. Isn't this the kind of situation when they tell you, stay put, it will be okay, and they run away for their lives? That happened in a subway accident. They said, it will be okay and stay put. But only the people who didn't follow the orders survived.
At 8:52 a.m., a terrified teenager calls emergency services, trying to explain that the ferry is sinking. But he doesn't know the coordinates. He's being asked for information the adults should already have.
Help me, the ship seems to be sinking.
A ship is sinking?
While that call scrambles, the stay put order keeps echoing through the hallways. And outside, the first rescue vessels are getting closer. It's easy to look back today and say you would have run for the deck. But standing in that hallway, hearing that voice, what would you actually do? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The students spot a rescue boat in the distance through the window. One texts his older brother that a rescue team just arrived. The water is rising and time is running out. By 9 a.m., some students already have life jackets on, but that doesn't mean they're safe. Others are still searching, some are struggling with old or damaged straps, and friends are passing jackets around to anyone who doesn't have one yet. Some passengers smell something like boiled eggs and worry about a gas leak. Others are still saying, no, we can't move because the announcement says not to.
Then more and more water came in, so we were standing on our luggage.
Around 9:07 a.m., communication between Sewol and the Korean Coast Guard, which operates the Vessel Traffic Services Network, is collapsing into confusion. VTS asks the crew to broadcast life jacket instructions. The crew says broadcasting is impossible. But as we know, that's bullshit.
Even as water was starting to leak in the ship, he ordered people to stay put. And even after he gave the distress signal, he ordered people to stay put. And so it contradicts everything where he says, well, it was just to assess the situation. When you give the Mayday call, you've already assessed that it is a life and death situation. So his order to tell people to stay put makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
The wrong instruction gets through clearly. The correction never does. On land, another failure is forming. President Park Geun-hye's actions during the first 7 hours of the disaster would later become one of the biggest political controversies in South Korea. For families watching the rescue stall, the absence of clear leadership felt like a betrayal. Inside the ferry, Zhang wasn't thinking about presidential timelines. She was staring at the water. At one point, escape looked like it was only one step away. But one step meant jumping from a capsizing ship into freezing water with no guarantee anyone was coming. So they wait, and every minute made that same step harder. By 9:30 a.m., the Sewol is no longer just listing. It's tilted at 60 degrees. Moving through the ship is no longer walking. It's like climbing through a collapsing building. Inside, hundreds of students and their teachers are trapped below deck, still waiting. But outside, Patrol Vessel 123's rescuers, along with civilian boats, are pulling the first survivors from the water. But in the rescue footage, one evacuation stands out. One of the first people pulled from the sinking ferry is not a student, not a panicked passenger. It's the captain.
The Coast Guard asked him, well, can we do an evacuation there? And the captain simply replied, no, we can't. The ship is too listed. Can you get me out of the ship? We'll figure out the plan there.
Footage captures him being helped onto a Coast Guard vessel, dressed in civilian clothes. He has stripped off his uniform.
There's absolutely no justification whatsoever for the captain to leave the ship, to abandon the ship while there are still passengers on board.
14 other crew members also bail, including the chief engineer. Inside, children are still sharing life jackets. Outside, the man responsible for them is already on a rescue boat. Zhang Eijin's escape is almost impossible to picture. She and a few classmates claw their way through spaces where the hallway has tilted into a vertical wall. To walk out means to climb straight up.
And we came out from what would be the hallway. But because the ferry was sinking, we walked out the walls. Once we came out, we saw our friends. They told us to come out. Nobody was there to rescue us.
Then the water rushes in.
But I think a lot of my friends were swept away. That's when I realized that I really needed to get out of there.
Some civilians on the outside deck reach down and pull her free. Around 150 passengers and crew jump overboard into the icy waters. Fishermen and private boats become the real first responders. They pull people from the freezing sea while the official rescue effort stumbles. Even nearby US Navy ships stand by, ready to help, but the authorization never comes. The South Korean government claims they have it under control. Can you speak about why they wouldn't accept help from the US Navy?
It seems like there is a sort of culture in Asia where you want to keep things in your realm. You want to stay like, no, this is my department and I'm taking care of this. No outsiders should interfere with the duty of my business.
How, if they did accept the help, that could have potentially changed the outcome?
Definitely, it would have changed the outcome. On top of the Americans, they also prevented commercial ships and fishing vessels to provide assistance too. They would have had twice the space needed to get all the students out of the ship and out of the water.
Order the fishing boats to retreat. Retreat!
The Sewol tilts over and further sinks in front of their eyes. And the Coast Guard response is pure chaos. The excuses come fast. Raging currents, no divers, a 45-degree tilt. These obstacles are real. They explain why a rescue is hard, but they don't excuse the failure. Here's the brutal truth. Entering a dark, flooding steel maze is a suicide mission. But the system is so broken that the rescuers looking directly at the trapped kids through the glass are the least equipped to save them.
People need to understand how difficult it is to execute a rescue operation in a ship that is tilted more than 45 degrees. We did everything we could in the given situation.
At 9:38 a.m., communications with the ferry go completely dead. The senior officers have fled, and hundreds of students are left trapped in the dark, waiting for help that is never coming. What remains of those final minutes are only glimpses of a desperate struggle. Text messages sent from phones held above the rising water. Mom, I love you. Forgive me. I hope we meet again alive. Later, recovery divers find the brutal evidence of the struggle. Broken fingers, bodies huddled in the corners of cabins, signs that students fought desperately against the reinforced glass as the water rose.
I felt extremely guilty and incompetent for not being able to save one life.
The most devastating image is of students trying to smash windows with plastic chairs, while rescue boats sit just feet away on the other side of the glass.
You know, the only people that they saved were the people that disobeyed the order, got into the water, and started swimming towards them. These were the only people who got saved. The rest were left stranded on the ship.
That is what makes the order unbearable. Survival is no longer just about who has a life jacket. It's about who escapes the command. Yet, inside the chaos, some people choose responsibility. Crew member Park Ji-young stays behind, handing out life jackets and pushing passengers towards safety until she cannot save herself. Civilians rush toward danger. Students drag classmates to safety. The heroism is real. but it comes from people who should have never been carrying this burden alone.
People were drowning right before our eyes. Anyone would have tried really hard to rescue them.
At 11:18 a.m., the Sewol slips completely beneath the freezing waves. The active window for rescue is over. But as the ship disappears, a new nightmare begins on land. On the nearest island, Jindo, a gymnasium is converted into a makeshift waiting room. It becomes ground zero for hundreds of frantic parents. But these families aren't just grieving. They're being fed complete confusion.
At the time, news outlets reported that everyone on board had been rescued. That's when I thought something was really wrong.
For a brief, cruel moment, parents and survivors think the impossible has turned into a miracle. Then, the story changes. More missing, more bodies, more officials claiming they are doing everything possible, while the families see absolutely nothing that looks like a rescue. And then, the grief turns into rage.
The parents of the missing are now into the 9th day of waiting.
My child was not rescued. The Coast Guard arrived, but they did not conduct the rescue.
Parents shout at visiting politicians. Water bottles fly at the stage. Some families later shave their heads in protest, demanding a real investigation and the immediate raising of the ferry. Then comes the air pump scandal. With the president watching, officials pressure divers to pump air into the hull. But it's pure theater. The divers knew it was too dangerous, so to appease the president, they randomly place the pump near the hull, but no air makes its way into the ship. The entire operation is designed to report success upward, even though it doesn't save a single life. Divers are traumatized by what they discover. Deep inside one of the cabins, 2 teenagers are found with their life jackets tied together. In their final moments, they didn't want to die alone. The fight for answers became its own disaster. For years, the South Korean government blocks all investigations. Instead of offering answers, officials treat the families like political enemies. Military intelligence even infiltrates the grieving support groups, tracking parents as national security threats. That is the second tragedy of the Sewol. First, the families lose their loved ones. Then, they must prove they aren't enemies just for asking why. Legal accountability eventually comes for some. Captain Lee receives life in prison. The shipping company's president gets 7 years, and other crew members receive heavy sentences. The disaster exposes a deeper, more systemic problem. The rescue authority itself has become part of the public's fear.
Your organization that is primary duty, that is reason of existing, is to preserve life at sea, is now seen by your population as a hazard on the sea. Let that sink in for a second, and how much it hurts a country when the figure of authority is seen as a life hazard.
The final toll of the disaster is staggering. In total, 304 people died. Among the 325 Danwon High School students on board, 250 were lost. Only 75 survived. Years later, Jeju Island remains one of the many voices trying to keep this story from being buried.
We will never forget you and always remember you. When we meet in the future, please don't forget us. And remember the time when we were all 18 years old.
Survivors carried guilt. Families carried unanswered questions. Yellow ribbons became the symbol of a country refusing to forget. Even memorials became political fights because Sewol was never only about one accident. It was about trust. And that is the lesson that still matters. Authority only works when accountability is attached to it. Without that, stay calm becomes a mask for we have no plan. Just 2 years before this tragic accident, another captain of a luxury cruise liner abandoned his ship as it sank off the coast of Italy. Check out our deep dive into the insane story of the Costa Concordia in our next episode. We'll see you next time on How to Survive.